Hello, U.S. History, and welcome to another Varela's videos. So our previous video was looking at how the Allies are turning the tide in the years 1943 in Europe, but I want to shift the focus for this video specifically to the Pacific, because we have to talk about how this war is fought in two different places around the world. So looking at where, and this is going to be notes that mainly involve the U.S., and how we are doing against the war, with the war against Japan. And I'll be honest, it's not going very well when these notes pick up. So Turning the Tide in the Pacific will be your title for these notes. And let's just kind of recap where we left off with notes a few days ago. So we are not doing well against the war in Japan. At this point, we have actually lost possession of the Philippines, and the Japanese have really, you can see on this map here, this orange area is all of the area they actually have taken control of by 1942, and their plan is to keep going even further. So we can't let that happen. Australia is a part of the British Empire, so they are our ally in this fight. And specifically looking at the Philippines right here, we know that losing the control of the Philippines was very bad for the US. We have talked about, and we will be talking about, the Bataan Death March and how the Japanese are going to take American and Filipino soldiers as prisoners of war and make them march 66 miles through from basically through the jungles of the Philippines. And we know that over 7,000 Filipinos and Americans die in this march. So we're going to be looking at that a little bit more specifically in class. But 1942 is not a good year so far for the Americans in the Pacific. So what's going to change? Oh, and how does this actually happen too? We have to look at the Japanese fighting style. The Japanese troops literally fight to the death. And I know you've heard of the word kamikaze. It basically are suicide missions, like this pilot here you can see is going to fly into this battleship. It is going to happen. And so the kamikaze pilots are a weapon the US just was not expecting. And so it definitely catches us off guard. And we know that over 3,000 Japanese pilots are literally willing to fly their plane into a ship to kill Americans on board. And that style is hard to fight against. It's basically putting yourself completely on defense all the time, and it's hard to go on offense. And we had not expected a fighting style like this. So, what will be our next move? The Battle of Midway is a very important battle, and I almost like to think of it as midway, midpoint, turning point. So remember this battle, it'll be on your test. The Battle of Midway Island takes place on June 5th, 1942. And what you're going to see is right over here. um, the Battle of Midway is really the turning point of the war in the Pacific, because this is where things finally start to change and go the Americans' way. It really wasn't an option to lose control of Midway, because if the Americans and basically the Allies had lost this battle, there was a real fear the Japanese could push their way to the coast of California and that there would be nothing really in their way to stop them. So the hero, or one of the heroes of this battle, is the U.S. Admiral Chester Nimitz. Basically, he's the commander of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific. So he is orchestrating how this naval battle is going to go. So the war in the Pacific is really the use of Navy and Army forces. Midway, in particular, is a naval battle. And what ends up happening is we start to finally crack the secret Japanese code because of the use of our Native American code breakers. And we're going to be talking about the Navajo and reading about them in your textbook. But these Native American soldiers are going to be able to break the Japanese code. So we realized what their plans were, and we're able to move our ships to really not only continue to protect Australia, but also to halt the Japanese advance. And Midway really is a U.S. victory. Some argue the Battle of Coral Sea over here is like a tie in a way, but we did protect Australia, so maybe a slight victory for the Allies. Midway clearly is a victory for the US. And because it's a victory for the US, it really is sort of a changing of the focus of the war in the Pacific to where now it halts the Japanese advance. They don't get to this diagonal line really. And then we're going to start to push the Japanese back towards the island of Japan. Okay, so now that we have stopped playing defense, let's take offense. And we have a strategy. Please remember this term, island hopping. It literally is hopping from island to island to try and take back all of the areas the Japanese have controlled. So here is Midway, June of 42. Here is Pearl Harbor. So they're actually not that far apart from one another. And then what we start to do is just bam, 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 bam. We basically attack all of these islands that the Japanese have control over. And the hope is every victory we get, every island the Allies take back, the weaker Japan becomes. And again, remember, Japan is way over here. So these are the islands and the areas they're controlling. Here's the Philippines. We will basically play leapfrog. If you ever played leapfrog where you jump over someone, then you bend over and they jump over you, we're leapfrogging from island to island to take back control of the Pacific and basically take control of the Pacific away from Japan. What is also happening simultaneously, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, is that while we are fighting this type of war in the Pacific, back home in the US, we are trying to create the ultimate weapon to end this war. And that is basically what's called the Manhattan Project, a very secret code name. Know that it is on your test. Using the ideas and research of Albert Einstein, a man named J. Robert Oppenheimer, right here, scientist, physicist that you can see, is in charge of this Manhattan Project. And what his scientists are doing, his group, are basically working in a secret lab in New Mexico in the desert to create what we now call the atomic bomb. At the time, they were just looking for a way to create the ultimate weapon, but it's already happening. And they finished their work on July 16th, 1945. They will actually test the first atomic bomb in this desert laboratory in New Mexico. So the idea is this war is being fought literally on multiple fronts. We have the war in Europe. We have the war in the Pacific. And this is almost like the war in the laboratory because this weapon we know is the game changer. So I know I'm jumping ahead here because this is kind of with the end of the war, but I want you to realize that while we're fighting the Battle of Midway in the Pacific, in this laboratory, you have men already working on the atomic bomb. Okay, so I'm going to stop these notes here. And what we're going to do is continue looking at how the war is going to come to an end first in Europe before we get to the atomic bomb. And we'll come back to the atomic bomb at the end, I promise. So hope you took some good notes, everyone, and I will see you in class.